one. Boom. All right, ladies and gentlemen, from employee to founder in the AI startup space, today's guest promises to be a source of inspiration for our audience. So join us as we explore the dynamic intersection of technology and entrepreneurship. Let's get this one started. Here we go.
Shut up and sit down.
Look, a business can give you everything you want in life. Prestige, wealth, freedom. It can also take everything away from you. This show is for those who are willing to take that risk. These are the real life stories of entrepreneurs. But before we start, I have one small favor to ask. Please leave a comment. It can be advice, critiques, tips, feedback, or share this with someone because your engagement is the most valuable and most powerful form of social currency. So thank you, and welcome to another episode of Business Bros.
All right, business bros, welcome to the show. We're going to take a deep dive into the world of artificial intelligence and entrepreneurship today. We have a remarkable guest, the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Yembo, the leader in AI-powered virtual surveys. With over 15 years of software engineering experience, he brings a wealth of knowledge to our discussion. And in this episode, we're going to explore his incredible journey from an employee mindset to a founder mindset and how his startup navigates the dynamic landscape of artificial intelligence. So stay tuned for a valuable insight, lesson, and inspiration. Let's welcome to the show, Mr. Zach Rattner. All right, Zach, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
All right, dude. Let's start off with the most obvious question. I think is always the first one. Everybody who comes on the show is here to promote something. You do something for a living. You're trying to get your message out for this thing. What is that? What is it that you do?
Sure. So I am a co-founder at a company called Yembo, and we sell a software package to home service companies. Think about moving companies, property insurance companies. And these industries just traditionally haven't had a lot of innovation in the AI space. So we bring that and allow folks to run their businesses faster and more efficiently. But more recently, I've written a book about my lessons that I've learned along the way in the past 7 years or so of running an AI company. It's called Grow Up Fast Book. And I've been inspired by the folks that I've been speaking with, just learning about people reading it, applying the lessons, and lots of really cool projects going out there in the world today. So happy to be here and happy to maybe share something that I've learned over the past few years.
All right, let's talk about both of those. Both have kind of a similar but a little bit different target audience, right? Like you're going after somebody very specific when it comes to the software that you've been developing to help them out. But I feel like the book might be a little bit different. Who are you going after here?
Sure. So I'm seeing AI is changing so many things so quickly. It feels like the last 6 months, we've had like maybe 10 years of progress in terms of products that have hit the market, what the technology can do. And I'm getting a lot of questions about it. I'm seeing a lot of people interested in using it, maybe a little bit nervous, not quite so sure where it leads. And I am of the belief that this is a net good on society, that I feel like it can free us from some things that we haven't been able to be freed from in the past in the workforce. And I feel like it can enable us to create new things and to provide products and services that were impossible earlier. So if you are new to the world of AI, if you are new to business, if you're a student, I would say check it out. There's probably something in there for you. But I do feel like even myself, as a person who's been working in the AI field for 7 years now, I am learning a whole lot. There's so much going on. It's tough to even keep up and see what's going on in the space. So I think we've got a few things we can talk about there as well in terms of how to stay on top of everything that's going on.
Let me ask you about your education background, because like you said, in the last 6 months, feels like everything has super advanced. Skynet has definitely taken over the internet. But I don't know if our traditional education system is like prepared you for what you have today or what you're seeing as people come into the workforce today. What's your background and what do you see as far as new people coming into the workplace? What kind of background do they need to be successful?
So sure. So I went the traditional route. I have a 4-year computer engineering degree from Virginia Tech. I got a job at a big tech giant called Qualcomm, telecom company, spent about 5 years there. And I did that because I wanted to make sure that I understood engineering practices and principles at scale before I went and ventured off into my own company. But I think the real key is if you look back at the courses that I went through and the things that I feel like had the most impact, it wasn't necessarily the lectures or the papers. It was the labs. It was the getting your hands dirty, being willing to try out the skills that you've learned, make a project with it. I feel like if I look back at my college years, sure, it was helpful to have the education, but I feel like where the rubber really met the road and where I really learned the skills that helped me get my first job and then later to start the company were like what I did on weekends, like the scrappy weekend project and the ability to kind of like roll up your sleeves, do something maybe the wrong way, but get something done. And half of our engineering team now at Yembo has a non-traditional background. Maybe they have side projects that they learned from or coding boot camps that they went through. Um, and what I'm seeing is there's not really a super strong correlation between the school that you went to and what you're capable of doing in the industry. I think there's a few reasons for that. Probably one of the bigger ones is things change so fast. So I've been out of school now over a decade. And just to give an example, I took a mobile engineering class on software for mobile devices. They taught that on handheld Windows PCs, like not even iPhone, not even Android. So I would argue that the specific tech stack you pick up in school will equip you for, I don't know, maybe 6 months afterwards. But the ability to break big problems down into small ones, to be able to experiment, to tinker, to have a hypothesis and get critical feedback around what's going to work and what's not going to work, I think those skills kind of stand the test of time. They don't get obsolete. And you can't really ever graduate on from being a student. If you're going to work in technology, everything's always changing. You always have to be willing to go back to square one and learn something brand new that that you haven't worked with before.
Yeah, it's the you got to learn to learn, right? You got to learn how to be educated, how to find information, how to break it down into bits and pieces, and more importantly, how to apply what you learned. Because I think that's the skill that you're talking about there. The labs that make the most impact in what you're doing is when you break it down and actually use it and test to see, well, okay, did I actually learn it, or do I need to go back and do a little bit of research on these bits and pieces? You started, you went to school, you got a corporate job, you started to learn stuff, then you kind of opened the door to venturing into your own business. And I'm sure this is kind of what's part of your book here, Growing Up Fast. What was that venture like? When did you decide you were ready to go out and be an entrepreneur and take those steps?
I think the first thing that I did was I wanted to always know your why. I think this is some advice that I give anybody who's like venturing out. Startups are cool and exciting and interesting, but they are a ton of effort. I think most founders, if you ask them 5, 10 years in, how much work did you think it would be? Everyone seems to think it would be less than it was. So what I did when I was venturing out was I actually took about a year in between after I left my corporate job and before Yembo took off. And what I was doing was I was working on different consulting projects and I was sharpening a couple different skills concurrently. So I had been an engineer by training. I felt like I was pretty good at writing code, pretty good at kind of the nuts and bolts of writing software. But putting yourself out there, putting a bid together, getting your first paying customer, negotiating retainers, I wanted to get some practice on that side of things. And I also wanted to get to meet other founders, other people that were working in the space. So I kind of positioned myself as an experienced engineer for companies that couldn't afford a full-time engineer yet. So I would come on, I'd do project by project basis work, I'd do part-time work, and I got to meet a lot of really cool, interesting people. And I think the key with that was I had a kind of dispassionate view of myself and my skill sets, and I was looking at where are the areas I'm strong and where do I want to flesh things out a little bit more. And I treated Yembo as one of these consulting projects partway through as I was starting off, and then that allowed me to kind of put some guardrails around it. So I was talking to my wife, and we put around a timeline around if this idea is going to take off, how much time is it going to take before the first dollar of revenue comes in, and how much of my own personal savings am I willing to invest. And by having these kind of constraints around the problem, not just blindly going in saying I'm going to go do a startup and I don't care what. I think it was very focusing, and it made us kind of pick the right decisions along the way, because it's really easy to kind of get caught up in the hype of the day and blow all your budget on things that don't actually matter. But by having like a goal and knowing your why, I feel like that really helps get the idea off the ground and make sure that you're staying on track.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to your engineering background. You know exactly where you're going. You have the plans kind of laid out. And even though stuff's going to happen along the way, things are not going to always work out to plan. You know where you're going and how to modify and adapt to kind of still reach that goal that you're shooting for. As I got a bunch of kids in the room that are going to graduate here, they're going to enter life. What advice would you give to them now that the world is kind of shifting, our economy's where it's at, but technology is advancing at such a rapid pace? If they want to get started as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give them?
Sure. I am actually a bit jealous. I think the resources that are out there to folks just graduating today are things that I would have longed for when I was in school. Um, sure, there's not all fantastic news if you read the news, but I think the news takes a pretty long time to respond when interesting things happen. I think what's happening in the AI space is fundamental, and it kind of takes some time for those fundamental improvements to trickle down into the companies that get created, the products that get built on top of them, and then the impact that they have on the world. So I feel like the news is good at telling something that happened like a few minutes ago, but these kind of fundamental advancements in technology, it's not a great signal. It's not a great indicator for what's going on there. I think after yesterday, where OpenAI had their big developer announcement, there are so many use cases and features that the world is collectively grappling with right now. And I think the really interesting and exciting part that I've seen is there's no one who has like the solutions manual at the back of the book. That is a concept that was created in school. It lives in school and it dies if you go outside the doors of the school. Everyone's trying to figure out, how is this going to work? What is it going to change? How can we make lives better? And the best ideas win. So it doesn't matter if you're a high school student or if you're a business executive. Nobody knows exactly where these things are going to end up. But if you look back in history, every other time there was a big technical revolution that happened, it ended up putting us in a better place. I mean, air conditioning came out, horses turned into cars, like the internet came out. They all opened up and sparked these inventions and these innovations. And there was no one person who took advantage of all of it, right? Like there was a fundamental innovation that was done. It builds this new platform people can build on. And then all of these different kinds of innovations start cropping up on top of it. So I would encourage, it's okay if the idea that you're pursuing doesn't maybe become like the next Facebook or the next Google, but just try putting in the reps, going through. Even if it doesn't work out commercially, and I hope it does, but even if it doesn't, look back at the skills that you've picked up there. I honestly feel like one day in a startup is like maybe 10 years in a larger institution, because you have to wear so many hats, you have to figure out so many different things. And it's just a really ripe time for innovation, because the rules are being written as we speak.
Oh, you're not even joking, dude. I saw the announcement about being able to make your own GPTs and then using native language to create programs without having to do any coding. And then being able to sell some of these GPTs on a marketplace. I mean, we're literally just opening the door to everybody's creative minds to see what we can implement here using AI to make things easier for ourselves, to turn that next horse into a car, at least in the digital space for businesses, their automations, their processes. I mean, it's a wild west for sure when it comes to the AI space, and I think it's just becoming easier and easier over time. We talked about how you had a plan, how as an engineer you come out, you know where your why is, you decide you're going to go in a direction, but stuff always happens. There's always going to be some mistakes that you make along the way. What are some of the mistakes, maybe the bigger mistakes that you've made that kind of gave you some lessons or shaped the way you were going when it came to either writing your book or starting your company?
Sure. I think a few of them, I like to think of myself as an open book. So happy to talk about the failures. I think I've learned more about those than perhaps the successes. And I think one of the big early ones is, as a professional with a particular background, it's easy and comfortable to go to the area that you're good at. And what I found is, oftentimes when you're doing a startup, you don't need someone who's immensely good in one area. You need a generalist to be able to bounce around and do a lot of different things. But these things are uncomfortable. So a big error that I made earlier on is trying to avoid the being bad at something and doing it ultimately to the detriment of the company. So as an engineer by training, I feel comfortable. I can design code, I can ship it, I can make sure it doesn't go down, can put in security tools so we don't get hacked overnight, things like that. But the what the company really needed was a spokesperson. Go visit customers, sit next to them, watch them try to use your product, hear their feedback, iterate on it, go in with an open mind. It doesn't matter if you worked all night on a feature. If the customer's not enjoying it and they're not achieving the goal that they want to get out of it, then we still got some work to do. Being willing to travel to industry events, go be a salesperson, go present the product. These are things that don't come naturally to me, and I didn't particularly enjoy in the early days. And I ultimately learned, but I think I took longer than I probably should have, that when something is new and when something's uncertain, as the entrepreneur, you want to be the one who goes and digests that uncertainty. And then once you've figured out kind of what works, what doesn't, get a lay of the land, then you can hand it off. But the very first sale, you don't want your salesperson making it. You need to make it. The very first event you exhibit at, you don't want somebody else to go explaining how the market works. You want to be out there doing it. And it just comes down to being comfortable with being bad at something, because I feel like a lot of times our skills and our abilities get the best of us because we pick an area, we study it, we get pretty good at it, we get used to being good at it, we enjoy the accolades that come along with being respected in our field. And that fear of going back to square one, I think for most folks is enough to make them discredit themselves. They won't even try. They'll say, I'm sorry, I'm just an engineer, I don't do sales, or I'm just a designer, I can't write product requirements. But oftentimes you don't need to be the best person in the world in that discipline. You just need somebody at the company who's relentless enough to move things forward so that you can unlock the ability to hire a salesperson to go and do these other things. So being humble, being willing to be bad at something, and being willing to do it maybe in an embarrassing setting in public is just part of putting yourself out there as a founder.
Oh, dude, you're episode 1255. And I remember starting off with episode 1 thinking, this is not good. I am horrible at this. This is uncomfortable. I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like the way I look on camera, all those things. But they've helped build a brand. They've helped create content at scale. They've helped me achieve a lot of that success over time, progressively getting better over time. If I had to start over right now, I think it'd be a lot easier in this space because of the skill set that you've developed. But ask me to go do something else, ask me to start coding, I'd be like, dude, I can look up that mountain and I know I can get there, but it's going to take some time. And I know that long looking obstacle is the thing that stops a lot of us. Let me ask you about what you guys do best as a company, and maybe some stories in your book that can kind of parallel that. Everybody has so many options with the different companies they can go to. You mentioned in the moving space, there's not a lot of options, but I'm sure there are some. Why does a company pick you over your competition? What is it that you feel your company just is a rock star at?
Sure. So there's a lot of innovation going on in the AI space, but I would say it's got an accessibility problem. Like there can be this fundamental paper that's going to change the world, but it's published on some academic journal and you can go read the PDF, maybe download the code. It's like relevant to a relatively small niche of society. And what I would say Yembo is uniquely good at is we're not just an AI company. We have best in class AI engineers. We do really cool things from the technology point of view, but fundamentally we understand we exist so our customers can get their jobs done faster, better, more efficiently. So we invest equally in product design, in understanding workflows and having good software, because people don't want to just use AI. They want to get their jobs done. And if AI is a tool that makes it better and faster, that's great. But I would say being able to look at a complex business workflow, and these industries we operate in are very logistically complicated. If you're doing an international move, it's not uncommon for maybe 40 different companies to be involved in the supply chain at various points in terms of packing and shipping and customs and unpacking and translations and all these different things. So it's just very logistically complicated. So to be able to look at that overall workflow and apply AI and bring it in places where it's actually going to move the needle and not just be like a buzzword is something that is not necessarily very intuitive. And to do it well, you need to have multiple disciplines. And this is where I feel innovation often lies. It's just not just one person being awesome at one thing, but it's somebody who has multiple backgrounds sitting at the intersection of two different areas. So there aren't a whole lot of people who are looking at AI plus moving, but there were plenty of people who were movers and plenty of people who were working in AI. And being able to apply and bring concepts from one industry and kind of cause people to come together in areas that they wouldn't have otherwise, I feel like is really where where the rubber meets the road and why folks sign up and why they end up using our product for their entire workday. When a company activates, they're usually they log in, they open Yembo, and they close it down 8 to 10 hours later when they sign off for the day.
It's that neural network, I guess, the connecting of the map, the making the processes so much easier. That space has so many different complications. I mean, it's nuts, and the way they kind of piece things together, it's always like, I use this software for this, I use this piece for this, I do this part for this, and it's for somebody to come in and learn it is so difficult and so time consuming that if that person leaves, just the replacement of individuals to operate the systems in those companies could be very expensive. And I think what you're doing is literally saying, look, we got it all right here, easy to understand. If you ever need to replace somebody, the system is there for them to learn rapidly, quickly, and they don't have to think about that stuff, right? They don't have to think about putting all these pieces together. Your company's already doing that. What do you think? You're already making other companies more efficient. That's one of the things that I think a company always looks for. They're doing something really well. They're successful at it. That's why they continue to do it. But they're always trying to get better. And your company does that for moving companies. What do you feel you're working on to kind of improve your own efficiencies to be better for your customers?
Sure. I think that's a great question and one that I'm never done answering. We have this concept that we have internally. You're free to borrow it if you think it's interesting. It's called the gripe doc. And what that is we have a running list of complaints around things that we don't like about workflow internally, or if we launched a brand new version of a product and it's like maybe it's a month before release day, it's got some rough edges that needed to be sorted out. But this is great anytime that you have a process you want to improve. It's a good method. And what it does is in the early stages, you are very open and you're soliciting critiques. So that's why it's called a gripe doc. It's not you don't have to try to do the sandwich approach where you say something nice and something critical and something nice again. You're just encouraging your team to lay it on and explain what's wrong with this. And then you switch gears halfway through and you look at that as the team. And everyone who put a gripe on is obligated to join this next piece. You can't just gripe and leave. You have to gripe and then join the fixing it call. And then we go over and we can prioritize. We can debate the relative merits of each. And one of the things that we see as an indicator of success, if you're making progress, is that gripe doc. If you were to organize and rank them, like the top 10 gripes ought to be changing month over month, because you fix the first one, it falls out of the ranking, something else comes up. And we do this for our products when we're launching and we are trying to get ready to go live. We may show it to a small cohort of early potential customers, get some feedback, and keep on iterating. The book, we even did that way. My editor and I finished and we did a soft launch and we only invited about 20 people, got some feedback. People who just said great and a thumb up. It's not that helpful. So we said, okay, what was wrong about it? What were you disappointed by? What was boring? Did you read it in one go? If you didn't, you paused at some point. What caused you to lose your attention to do that? And we kind of iterated our way to the version that we ultimately released. And I feel like opening yourself up to critique and letting other people point out, I don't like the way this works, but I think we should do it this way instead. It's not necessarily comfortable or fun to have somebody tell you that, like, this thing that you spent you probably work harder on your startup than any other thing in your life. But to be told that there are areas that it's not doing well is not the most fun thing to hear, but you got to kind of see through that and understand that they mean the best, and that's why they're breaking it up. I've actually done a semi-scientific study on when you show a new version of a product to a set of customers, the ones that complain are much more engaged and interested than the ones that just tell you what the thing could do down the road. Because when someone's complaining, they have a motive. They've clearly used your product and they're trying to get something. They're feeling frustration, which means that they have expectations that aren't being met. But if I just say, hey, I use AI for moving, and you say, oh, that's cool, tomorrow you could do it for painting or plumbing, like, there's no conviction, right? You don't have to have done anything with our product. You don't have to like say anything about how you'd want to use it to make that work. So it's a little bit counterintuitive maybe, but you get an email from a client and it's a little bit cranky and they're complaining a bit. That's actually a blessing that they are they want to do something. They want to raise the bar. And I see it as like an opportunity to stretch yourself and to go a bit further than you maybe would have otherwise.
Yeah, nobody likes to hear that their baby's ugly, but in this case, you get the opportunity to make those changes, and that's huge. That not only is that customer engaged, and that's why they're kind of complaining to you, but when you actually make a relevant change that is as a result of what they're talking about, what they're complaining about, now you got the loyalty for life. Now this person's going to come back and just love and talk about your product service to every single one of the people in their industry, which I think speaks volumes to the company making the changes, and that you actually care about your clients, that you care about what they're talking about, that when they send you feedback, it's not going on to deaf ears, dropping in some email inbox that nobody checks. You're actually paying attention to it and using that data and information to improve their customer experience at the end of the day. Where do you see your company going from here? Where and where do you see your book also? What is the future hold for Zach?
I am on a mission, and my team's on a mission that we want Yembo to be a household name. Like if you have a cold, you grab a Kleenex. You want to search, you Google, and there are so many processes that different industries in the home services space have. But we wanted to start with you Yembo it. So I feel like we're there with the moving industry. We more recently launched in property insurance, but there's so many more opportunities and so many more things that we can add. So until it's common where you can hear it on the street where someone says, "Oh, I'm going to go home and Yembo it and get a quote for something," then we've still got work to do. And on the book side, there was just so much happening in the AI space that I felt like I just couldn't sit it out anymore. I needed to be able to share the lessons that were learned, encourage people to participate. I think one of the things that made the internet really successful when it was launching is it was totally open to anybody who had a computer. It wasn't like this exclusive club. Um, so if you look at the innovations that came out of it, a lot of the people who made successful companies, they were first-time founders. They were tenacious people who were smart. They understood an area particularly well, but it wasn't like it was an elite class of like technophiles who built the whole thing. It was the technology got built. It was very open about being democratized, about being open to anybody. And if you look at what gets built out of it, a lot of the really interesting places came from people who had very different backgrounds. So I feel like here with AI, I don't want to live in a world where there's like one monopolistic player that controls all of the AI and everybody else is just using it, living in that world. I think there are so many opportunities to bring it into spaces that are kind of ripe for disruption. And the crop of founders that's going to open up, I feel like it would be great if it's like the internet. It's all over the place and you can play around with it in the weekend, find a niche about something that you know particularly well and that you personally have a pain point with. You solve it. Other people say, "Hey, that's an interesting problem," and then kind of off to the races. eBay started, I think it was written over the course of Memorial Day weekend, if I remember right, because the founder had stuff in his garage he wanted to sell. So he was tinkering, put together a site and a way to sell your leftover goods. And here we are, like, 25, 30 years later. And that's like I sold some stuff last week on it. So it's these things in the technology world compound. When you build something, you're not just selling to your neighborhood or your village. I believe Google Chrome has more daily active users than the country China or India. So it's like one of the largest human institutions that's ever been created. And if you have like a $9 a month WordPress site, you can go put something together and be accessible to that audience. So it just opens up so many opportunities that no other point in time in history has even been possible. So people always ask me about how startups are hard and how do you get them off the ground? But I just feel like, how can you not make startups with all of the different innovations going on around? Imagine you're like, I don't know, a baker in the Middle Ages. Like, what would you do to have your product accessible to 2 billion people? Like the idea of 100,000 would have overwhelmed the bakery. But there's so much opportunity right now that I feel like there's almost how could you not have a startup instead of why would you have a startup?
It's up for the taking, man. You just got to decide that that's what you want to go after it and make it happen. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it is. We have it right in front of us. And if we take advantage of it, the world is our oyster. And if we don't, well, sit back because somebody else is going to take that spot. And hopefully it's something that you can use. Zach, if anybody wants to grab a copy of your book, maybe they want to find out more about Yembo, how can they do that?
Sure. We got the ticker going below. growupfastbook.com has the links to Amazon, Spotify, if you prefer audiobooks. All the common booksellers are there. Company website is Yembo, YEMBO.ai. And I'm active on LinkedIn. So if you type in Zach Rattner or Yembo on LinkedIn, I'll pop up. You can shoot me a message there.
It's over. Go home. Is your business in need of marketing? Try starting a podcast. But not just any podcast. Podcast like a pro. We can show you how to take your business from being invisible to becoming a brand people trust. Go to www.businessbros.biz to get started today.